I am a firm believer in that, not just so much the ice bath, but I used to have anxiety years ago, like probably 15 years ago. I was getting panic attacks out of the blue for no reason, for no reason. And I was like, I want to get to the bottom of this. I want to figure this out. I want this to stop. And I didn't go to a psychiatrist. I didn't get medication. I was just like, I'm gonna figure this out on my own. What did I do differently? How did things change? Blah, blah, blah. And I cured it. And I'm not going to say I cured it. It went away. But one of the things I figured out was, and I think this is just my theory on it, that we are used to being scared and going into fight or flight traditionally, like evolutionarily wise, constantly in, times of our life being in fight or flight. And as we get safer and safer in this world, we're not in fight or flight. And so my adrenaline is just like, hey, I'm here. I'm manufactured. I have to go. I can't go anywhere because you're not doing anything. So I'm just going to let it go. And I'm putting adrenaline into you. And all of a sudden I'm going, why am I panicking? Why am I in this state of panic? And I'm just sitting here, in the green room of a comedy club or at my kitchen having breakfast. Why am I having a panic attack? And so one of the things I started doing was scaring myself again and putting myself in scary situations, like surfing waves that were kind of consequence, or mountain biking down hills that I shouldn't be mountain biking, and putting myself into those little fearful situations. And I don't know, but I don't have it anymore. It's gone. And so,
yeah, a way of thinking of that is, we like to say around our house, you don't get something for nothing. Like your secret squirrel superpower of being quick, of interacting in the world, of playing, comes with a price tag. And that price tag is, you need to go, do this thing. And if you don't move and experience this in some way, it manifests as anxiety. So you came up with you're like, oh, I just need these inputs and outputs. And I think if everyone had a slightly different version of that for themselves, get to know yourself a little bit, right? We just haven't empowered anyone. If we did some preliminary research right before the pandemic. We were looking at trying to get kids moving more in schools. And we asked, some of the surveys we asked was like, well, how much do you need to move? How much? Kids had no idea. Do you need to sleep? How much? Kids had no idea. These are 5th and 6th graders. Tell me about what is good food and how much do you need to eat? No idea. And so what we're seeing is oftentimes, we're poorly preparing adults for how to self-soothe, how to move. And if you really look, here's going to be a really vulnerable moment. Dune is my favorite book in the world. There we go. I said it. Just so you Dune haters out there. But Paul sticks his hand in the box, and she introduces this pain where he thinks he's dying, right? His hand is literally burning off. And the test is, she's testing him psychologically. Does he have the wherewithal to keep his hand in the box? Yes or no? And she puts a needle in his neck, and it's like, hey, if you pull your hand out of the box, I'm going to kill you. So he has this choice. I'm going to withdraw from this painful stimulus like an animal, or I'm going to keep my hand in the box because I can override these feelings and work this through. And I'm conscious enough of my own process, and I'm self-aware that I can take it. And he pulls his hand out of the box. He's kind of like, what the hell, lady? And she's like, look, our test is crisis and observation. And that, for me, when I first read that a million years ago, I was like, oh, that's why I really love going kayaking and scaring myself on these Class 5 rivers. Because I get to see how I deal in these situations. I get to see how I handle, I paddled in the World Cup, where like you're at the start of a World Cup race and man, you're stressful. And how do you handle that? You have to do the thing. And if we just take the pandemic and use that as the crisis, how did we do? Well, it turned out we were more depressed afterwards. We were more addicted to drugs. And again, self-soothing. How are we prepared to handle how we're feeling? We were fatter. We were more diabetic. We saw more isolation. What we saw is that the very things that make us human, like our brains need to be around other brains. That piece people forget about. Like your brain cannot be in social isolation. And it's not enough to be in a Zoom call with your friends. Like you actually have to be around other human beings. Like otherwise your brain is freaking out. All of those stresses that we were talking about, plus the physical stress, plus the existential reality of that your family could be dying, you could be losing your job, all of those psycho-emotional things. What we saw was that we had a population who had been failed by our health and wellness industries. What we saw is that there was an isolation pockets of people who were like, yeah, I was able to cook and had my own home gym and I could meditate and use the right. And we had this vertical where we were really intact and managing, suffering because our gyms were closed, but we were still good. And the rest of the world, we just left behind. And so one of the things that Juliet and I are, really feeling strongly about right now is if we're really going to make this fitness and wellness industry worth a crap, and we really do have to, eventually we're going to have to turn around and say, hey, we're not really serving society. We're just serving ourselves. We have better abs and more tans and on Instagram, and it hasn't transformed our communities at all. In fact, we're leaving everyone behind. And now it's starting to look like equity and justice, right? And don't get me wrong, like everyone has a choice, it's way more complicated than that. It is super complex. And it takes a minute to teach people how to navigate this thing. And we can put pain or exercise or nutrition or stress or any one of those things can be, do you know how to handle yourself as a human being? By the way, there's lots of different ways to do that. I don't really care how you do it, but you have to come out unharmed or less harmed. And our crisis and observation, we just fell on our faces. That's how well we were prepared for this
It
thing.
seems like a difficult message to get across. I mean, in my little ways, I try.